Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
With your no good Ann Camp, you're listening to the Ann Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson, and the Windy City representative, the baddest brother above the Mason-Dixon line, my play cousin, the Right Reverend Christopher Butler. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you know that Chris is not here today, but we do have a live broadcast coming from the Exiles Conference coming up in about a week. So you will see us together again soon, and stay posted for that. Now, for me, I just got back from the Glory 2024. The Glory 2024 is a conference out in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it is hosted by my guy, Pastor Ebenezer and Darius, which is a really solid dude. Y'all need to check him out. He's also the host of the Shaping Culture podcast, and I actually got a chance to do that podcast, so that was cool too. Jackie Hill Perry was out there, Megan Ashley was out there. It was a awesome conference. So if you didn't get to make it in 2024, you need to try to make it in 2025, especially if we talked about the subject this year was deconstruction. So we kind of talked about deconstruction a little bit, but really hit it from a lot of different angles. And Eb and them just did a really good job. So shout out to y'all for that work. Unless you've been under a rock, you know by now that Sean P. Diddy Combs, who is a R&B and hip hop mogul, I don't know any other way to put it, you know that he has been indicted, that he's sitting in jail as we speak. And I think he was denied a $50 million bond. So he has no bond. He's in jail right now on suicide watch, which, as I understand, is just a procedure that they go through, especially for high profile people that are in this situation. And again, these are all allegations right now. So he's been indicted. That means a grand jury said that there was probable cause, for this issue. But these are all allegations. And so he's been indicted on sex trafficking and a whole bunch of other charges that have to do with these big parties that he was throwing called freak-offs. And again, the allegations of the crimes are allegations, but the idea that these freak-offs were full of all manner of debauchery is not in question, right? He was pretty open about what went down at these parties, and it wasn't savory stuff, but he was pretty open about it, and I think wanted to make that a part of his brand. And so we know what was going on after these freak-offs, and he would invite a whole bunch of different celebrities, and they would, do a whole bunch of things that most parents would pray that their child probably never does. Another part of this case is that there apparently, I should say, were videos that he was filming this, I think unbeknownst to many of the guests, that he was filming these things. And so just a lot going on. And I'm not going to go too deep into this, it's just the conversation, to spark a conversation for the introduction. But one of the things that I was thinking about is Diddy, in many ways, and his freak-offs are America's degeneracy staring back at it. Our degeneracy staring right back at us. And you wonder, how did many people get caught up in this? I can almost guarantee you that a lot of people at these parties were raised not to do things like this. And I'm not coming from some moral high ground. I haven't always been in the best situations myself, and many of you know that. So it's not about that. But I do want to look and say, how do people get caught up in this when they really, at at the end of the day know it's wrong? How do we get caught up in these situations where you have people? Because most of the people, from what I understand, voluntarily went. Now, there are some women and things like that who were intimidated as time went on, or kind of forced to do things that they weren't supposed to do. Those are the allegations. And how do people get caught up in this again? And I think it's a mixture between ambition and appetite. I think in our culture, in our society, we have made making it, becoming famous, getting material things, making it by any means possible. We've celebrated that. We've looked at the person who just did whatever they had to do to get in the position they wanted, to get that album, to get that professional job. And we've said, man, you worked very hard and did whatever you had to do to get that position. And I think that's wrong. Doing whatever you have to do to get a position or to receive favor from somebody in power is wrong. And too often our society does not call it wrong. We kind of praise it and celebrate it. And I think it's brought us to this point in some ways. So here's a question I want everybody to think about. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but how do we make sure the next generation, Christian and non-Christian, doesn't attend the proverbial Diddy freak off of the future? Because I don't think he'll be throwing any more of these, even if he does get off. How do we prevent that? What kind of values do we need to be professing, and what do we need to correct to make people not want to be in that situation? And I guess, we always have scripture as part of this podcast. So here's the scripture for today, which is a scripture that I actually read during the Glory conference as well. Galatians 3:15. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. How can we be free and liberated and even enjoy parts of life without indulging our flesh? How do we live in that tension, and how do we do a better job of instructing others to live in that tension as we struggle through it ourselves? So just something to think about. As always, I want to give a shout out to all our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. Listen, y'all listen to this podcast because when you come to this podcast, you know that we're going to apply biblical principles, and we're going to talk about things that you may talk about in private or think about in private, but that a lot of people, especially people in political positions and high civic positions, aren't going to talk about in public. You get that conversation here that you're not going to get other places, with a high level of experience when it comes to politics and expertise and understanding of how to read politics and all that. That's why you come to us. And we're going to continue to provide that. But what I want you to understand is there's not a lot of resources and support for that type of ministry or that type of podcast, right? That's why most people don't do it. So if this is going to continue, we need your support. One of the ways that you can support the movement is you can go to andcampaign.org/donate, and you can just donate to the movement. That allows us to spread our framework to more Christians and just more people in general, so that they can hear what we're about and what we're trying to accomplish. You also can go to patreon.com/churchpolitics. And if you become a patron, you will get premium episodes. You'll get an episode that other people aren't going to get. Okay. But even more than becoming a premium subscriber, be a part of the movement, get off the sidelines, because you know that Christians need to be less partisan, less ideological, and more focused on Christian principles. If you believe that, support us in what we do. And for all of y'all who are already supporting us, thank you. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe. And so we can reach more people. That's what we're trying to do. All right. Well, as always, grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. It's interesting because over the last week, I had friends who were texting me an article, and they text me this article and were asking for my thoughts on it. Did I think the article was accurate? Where do we go from here, and so on. And the article was written by Christian historian Daniel K. Williams, and this was in the Atlantic, and it was entitled "Democrats Can't Rely on the Black Church Anymore." Democrats can't rely on the Black church anymore. And I think this article has some really good insights. So you should check it out when you get a chance. There will be a link in the show notes. And here's what Williams basically is saying. He says, traditionally, the route to winning the African-American vote for Democratic politicians has run through Black churches. And the members of Black churches are still very overwhelmingly loyal to the Democratic Party. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the statistics that he points out is that 90% of Black Methodists are Democrats. Okay. Now, he says some things are changing. He says, but today, many of those churches are shrinking and their members are aging. The Black church no longer holds the place of importance that it did for their parents or their grandparents. All right. And what he's saying is that fewer than 1/3 of Black Gen Zers and millennials ever go to Black churches. The result of this is that the Democratic Party is losing a reliable way to reach Black voters. And it even shows how the Harris campaign has had less interaction with the Black church than it has than Democratic presidential campaigns have had in the past, especially when it comes to reaching young voters. That just is what it is. Now, he says that Black Protestant churches are being squeezed by two forces. The first force is secularization. Although African Americans are still more likely than whites to attend church attendance rates are falling among younger Black people. Nearly half of Black Gen Zers and millennials say that they seldom or never attend church. The evidence suggests that some Black people who have stopped attending church have also left the Democratic Party. Interesting. A 2024 study by the University of Texas sociologist Jason E. Shelton found that only about 43% of religiously unaffiliated African Americans are Democrats, which he notes is the lowest percentage for any religious classification in Black America. Okay. Secondly, so the first thing is secularization. The second thing that's kind of squeezing Black churches and while they're losing members is that Black churches are also losing potential congregants to white or multi-racial churches. Among Black Gen Zers and millennials who do go to church, nearly half say that they do not attend churches that are predominantly Black. Black Christians who attend these churches are also significantly less likely than members of historically Black denominations to identify with the Democratic Party. So Black folks who don't go to church are less likely to be Democrats. Black folks who don't go to predominantly Black churches are less likely to be Democrats. All right. Now, understand this, though, and this is an important nuance. Most Black Christians who leave the Democratic Party don't just become full-fledged Republicans. They actually usually become independents. Even when they are surrounded at church by white evangelicals who are enthusiastic about the Republican Party, African Americans, according to this article, are still highly reluctant to support the GOP. Now, many of you know that I'm currently working on a book, finishing up a book, my prayer is, on the Black church's social action tradition. And the AND campaign has already done a documentary that includes that subject. So How I Got Over is a documentary that we've come out with. You can go to Right Now Media and check it out. And it's really about orthodoxy in the Black church. And one part of this 5-part series is about the Black church's social action tradition and how orthodoxy was a major part of that. Okay, so go to Right Now Media, check that out if you haven't. It's well worth your time. Now, the reason that we've spent so much time on this subject is that it's a rich tradition. And it's a rich tradition that you might not be able to tell it right now, but it's a tradition that historically has not been beholden to the ideological left or the ideological right. It hasn't. We've primarily been in the Democratic Party for some time, but we haven't been beholden to the ideology that runs that party historically. Now, over the past few decades, that's changed. And I think that's an unfortunate change, but I'll get into that a little later. Now, most Black churchgoers have been in the Democratic Party since Kennedy versus Nixon. And there's a story behind, us kind of siding with Nixon and all that. But I'm not going to get all the way into that. You can kind of check it out in some of our past episodes. And so most Black people have been in the Democratic Party since Nixon. You have the Southern strategy and stuff like that also played into it. And it's interesting because a lot of my peers in white evangelical churches seem not to want to understand why Black people have been in the Democratic Party. They just don't want to understand it. They think because of abortion that that every Christian has to be in the Republican Party. While I think that's legalistic and they're really adding the scripture on that one, they don't seem to want to understand why we might choose to be in a different party. So let me talk about that really quickly, right? Because there is a very logical and understandable reason for this. And it's not because we love everything about progressivism. Primarily, it's about the historical fact, that conservatism stood with Jim Crow. That conservatism stood against voters' rights and stood against the civil rights movement. It stood against them. It tried to stop those things from moving forward. And my question for you, for people who don't understand this is, why would I consistently vote for a group who over history has continually demonstrated that they don't want me to be a part of the democratic process? Why would I do that? Why would I support a group that has condoned and enabled racists, that has made space for racism? Now, obviously, not everybody in the Republican Party is racist. I'm not saying that. But it's very clear to me that space has been left, a seat at the table has been left for people who have some very serious issues when it comes to race. Why would I team up with a group who's doing that? Right? I once had a Black pastor say to me, yes, progressives are crazy. I realize that, but at least they don't hate us. Now, is that a generalization? Of course it's a generalization. He knew it was, and I knew it was a generalization too. But I understand exactly what he meant. And anybody who doesn't see the racism that's been condoned in the Republican Party, you need to look a little harder, because either you're in denial or you're just not paying attention. Okay, so that's the reason. But let me say this, because I do think white evangelical Christians have had a unhealthy relationship with the Republican Party. But let me be impartial. If much has been said about how the white evangelical church has compromised itself in Republican parties, and I believe it has, then something also has to be said about the Black church's not always healthy or reciprocal relationship with the Democratic Party. I can't talk about one, whether they're equal or not. I can't talk about one without addressing the other, because the Black church's relationship with the Democratic Party is not healthy. And let me tell you what I mean. I've literally seen politicians come into the Black church and basically hold a political rally and then go back into the state legislature or wherever they came from and try to destroy religious liberty. I've seen it with my own eyes. I don't need anybody else's experience to let me know what's been happening. I've seen Democratic politicians go into a Black church, get acknowledgement, get recognition, get all sorts of love, and then go back into the legislature and support legislation like the Equality Act, which would basically shut down the K through 12 school attached to the church that they just went to. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen the Democratic Party isolate and attack and try to destroy Black Christian candidates running in their party because of that candidate's Christian convictions. I know these people. I've seen it happen. We did a video on religious exclusion where it happened. We'll put it in the show notes. So whether it's campaign season or not, whether it's election season or not, you can't tell me that it's been all good between the Black church and the Democratic Party and that that's been a healthy relationship. It has not been. And there are people who benefit from it, but it has not been a healthy relationship, just like the relationship between Republicans and maybe I shouldn't say just like, because I'm not saying they're equal, but in a similar way that the relationship between white evangelicals and Republicans has been. This is not to say that they're equal, but it is to say that they are both infected. And so I don't care who's running for office. I don't care what season it is. I'm going to be honest about that. And I know some of us just can't be honest about things like that during election season because we think it gives the other side an advantage. We should care more about the truth. And that is the truth. All right. It has not been a healthy relationship. If I'm going to talk about the white evangelical relationship, I got to talk about the other one because neither of them are good. And we can go back and forth on which one is worse. It's not all, the conversation is not always about which one is worse, as if it's right. All right. Now, has the Black church lost influence in the Black community? As much as I want to say no, that the Black church is standing just as strong as it ever has, that's what I want to say. I can't say that. It has lost influence in the community, but guess what? It's still the strongest institution in the community. It still is relied upon within the Black community in many ways that we can't rely on any other institution. And the Black church still serves a very important purpose and will continue to serve a very important purpose. I believe that the church as a whole and the different parts of the church needs one another, that we need to learn from one another, and we see the gospel better through one another when we're communicating and when we have a healthy relationship. We're not there right now, and we need to get there. But the Black church is going to be around. The Black church is going to serve a very important purpose for a long time. Okay? But I can't deny that there's some influence that has been lost, just like the American church in general has lost some influence. And there's a number of reasons for that, whether we want to talk about failures when it comes to, standing for what we really are supposed to stand for. All those things play a part. But I know a lot of people doing a lot of work, feeding a lot of people, clothing a lot of people, housing a lot of people, educating a lot of kids from that tradition. And they'll continue to do that. In as far as any church is an agent of a party, that church is wrong. I don't think it's wrong for Christians to be in a party, and I'll talk about that a little later. But if we become agents of the party, then we've outsourced our public witness to that party. Then that party has become the master of our social action. And I've seen that happen in some parts of the Black church. I've seen that happen in some parts of the white evangelical church, where we have been used and abused by the party and have not stood on business in the way we should when it comes to checking the party. The church always needs to have a prophetic independence so that we can step back and critique what's going on rather than just going along with it. And I've seen that happen. So am I sad that the Democratic Party cannot use the Black church in the same way that it has used it for some time? No. Do I know a lot of Black pastors who have never let the party run them or use them? Absolutely. And I would say most of them I know have not allowed them to run them or use them. But when it's happened, it's been wrong. And so in as much as the Democratic Party needs to find somewhere else to go and needs to find a different technique or pursue a different angle or approach, I'm not going to shed a tear about that because we're not here to support any party. We need to be focused on taking the right position, not necessarily following behind a party. You got me? We'll be back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Amen. Got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
All right, I am back on the Church Politics Podcast. It's Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. Let's talk a little bit, and if you've been watching TV at all or even listening to the radio, you've seen this. Let's talk a little bit about the rise of sports gambling. The rise of sports gambling. There's a really good article, again, written in The Atlantic, and we usually try not to use the same platform too many times in one episode, but this just happened to be two really good articles coming out of the same magazine. And this article talks about legalizing sports gambling was a huge mistake. It's by Charles Fane Lehman. And I found it to be a really good article, but let's get into it because I think this is going to impact a lot of us if it hasn't already. So just give you a little bit of history. In 1992, sports betting was generally banned throughout the United States. Okay. In 1992, it was basically cut off. And this was because of the U.S. Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which prohibited sports gambling in America in general. Okay. So this went on for about 30 or so years. And then in 2012, New Jersey legalizes sports betting. So New Jersey says, hey, we get a lot of money from gambling. We're going to legalize it. Well, after they legalized it, the NCAA brought a suit for violation of the act that I was just talking about. Okay. They're saying, hey, this is illegal. You can't do this. And so the NCAA takes New Jersey to court. Well, this ends up going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules that the act is a violation of the 10th Amendment. Basically, this act that had prohibited sports gambling was the federal government taking powers that actually should taking power and authority that actually should belong to the states. So the Supreme Court was saying whether gambling is legal or not is a decision for states. It is not a decision for the federal government to make. After this happens, over time, about 38 states end up legalizing gambling. And so that's where we are right now. There's 38 states where gambling is legal. Okay. Now, it is said that in these 38 states, they're expected to make $10 billion in revenue based off sports gambling. So the reason that you see a lot of ads for sports gambling is because it is a very lucrative business. All right. But based on social science and some of the research that is coming out, it's very clear that legalizing sports gambling was a mistake. And that is wreaking havoc already on a lot of American families. Listen to this. According to a study done by Northwestern University, it showed that legal sports gambling depletes household savings and created an increase in overdrafts in bank accounts and the maxing out of credit cards. So this is how it's hitting individual households. Another study goes along with that and says that legal sports betting increases the risk of household bankruptcy by 25 to 30%. I want you to sit back and chew on that for a second. Increases the risk of household bankruptcy by 25 to 30%. Increases debt delinquency. All right. Has about a 9% increase in domestic violence towards a partner. we have so many people gambling, and I think it says something like 1 in 3 Americans is gambling, doing this legal sports gambling. But it's even having an impact on domestic violence. What do you do once you lose? And guess what? We all know that gambling wouldn't be around. You wouldn't have an opportunity to do this if the house wasn't going to win. So most of the time, you're going to lose. And when you're losing large amounts of money, that impacts how you treat your family. It impacts your mood, it impacts your finances, and so on. It's a big deal. And it's interesting to me because for so long, in the way that I think this got legalized in so many places, is gambling was seen as something that the prude conservatives complained about. Now, you guys know me. When it comes to social issues, I am center right, if not a little further than center right sometimes, okay? And I think that our society has lost moral knowledge. I think a lot of people looked at gambling and said, just like a lot of other things, some people are even doing this with drugs and prostitution, saying, you know what, they're prude, they're trying to stop us from what we want to do. These conservatives who just want to tell people what to do, we can handle it ourselves. There's nothing really wrong with gambling. Let people do what they want to do. And now we see that it's not working out so well for us. Now, when we will admit that, that's the huge question. When will people look at this and say, actually, this isn't good for families. This isn't good for America. And what I want to tell you is when there's prohibitions on things like gambling, I don't think it's Christians just telling people, hey, you shouldn't do that because we said so. I think it's society saying, hey, we need some guardrails because we ourselves need to be protected from what we might do in certain instances. And there are some things that have such a negative impact on our families, on our society, that we say we don't want to do them. We don't want them around, right? I think that's what's happening here. But I also think it's an example of the lack of, again, moral knowledge in our society right now. Everything that we can do, we shouldn't necessarily do. Now, if you were raised like me, I was raised to believe that the Bible said gambling was a sin. As I've gone back through the Bible, I don't see that explicitly stated. So I think we need to be honest about that. If we're going around saying, hey, gambling is obviously a sin that's explicitly stated in the Bible, I don't see that explicitly stated in the Bible. If somebody knows a place where it is explicitly stated in the Bible, just let me know. Now, just because it's not explicitly stated in the Bible doesn't mean it's not wrong and doesn't mean that it's not an obstacle in the way of human flourishing, which I believe that it is, right? Receiving money that we haven't worked for, loving money in a way that would make us want to gamble. Those are things where we can say, hey, the Bible does seem to implicitly say that something like this would not be good for humanity. Now, I want to be very careful because some people do have addictions. And thank God I've never had the urge to gamble. Gambling is just not something that has ever appealed to me. But I do want to make sure that we show compassion for people who do have these addictions, right? Because it's not a simple thing to just say, stop doing it, right? Let's make sure that we have compassion, but also realize that this could have a devastating effect as it grows because it's still growing, right? Now, one of the ways that it was sold to people is that one of the justifications for it was, hey, it's going to bring in a lot of tax revenue to these different states. If you legalize gambling, you're going to have a whole bunch of money coming in. I always think that's a bad reason to legalize something. I think that's a terrible gamble, so to speak, pun included, to legalize something that could be potentially harmful because of the tax revenue. Just not a good bet to make. All right. But guess what? The tax revenue isn't even what they said it was going to be. So one of the ways that they sold it hasn't even happened. Altogether, the 38 states and the District of Columbia, all these folks together have made about $50 million altogether in tax revenue. That's not worth what gambling is already doing to a lot of American families. And so Christians, we have to, I think we have to be able to explain ourselves in a better way, but we can't stop pushing against things like this because people don't want to hear it. We need to explain it in a way where we're not coming from some moral high ground and just saying, don't do it because I said so. But when you come with the facts, when you come with the statistics, and you let people know, I'm saying this because I care about you and me. It ain't just secular people who are gambling. It's Christian people who are gambling and suffering from this too. And so we need to be able to communicate with other communities to say, hey, man, this ain't me telling you what to do, but listen to me on why this might not be good. And the truth of the matter is, it's not just Christians who are against gambling. So we need to be able to come together with other communities with this message, because I think this is only going to get worse. Let's keep our eye on it. I'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast. All right, we are back on the Church Politics Podcast. As always, thank you for joining us. All right, guys, I recently sent out a tweet that caused somewhat of a stir in some Christian circles, and I'll just read it to you and then let you be the judge, all right? Here's a tweet. I say that it isn't a sin to be in the Republican or the Democratic Party. However, it is unfaithful to be a Republican who doesn't speak out against racism or greed. It is unfaithful to be a Democrat who doesn't speak up for the value of unborn life or speak against the sexualization of children. If your partisanship causes you to deny the whole counsel of God, then you're in sin. Obviously, this is a response to the idea that we hear from some Christians, mostly on the right, that you can't be a faithful Christian and be in the Democratic Party. I have not read that in the Bible. If there's somewhere in the Bible that explicitly says that, please let me know. I have not read that in the Bible. But to be fair, I think what they're saying is, because of the Democratic Party's agenda when it comes to abortion, because of the Democratic Party's agenda when it comes to transgender ideology, to be a Christian and to be in that party is wrong, and it's unavoidably wrong. Now, you guys know that I disagree with that. I don't really care about either party. If both of them were tomorrow to disappear, I wouldn't shed one tear. Okay. But I do think that's wrong. And I think there are Christians in both parties who are faithful, right? I think you can be in any party and be faithful. And I think there are Christians in both parties who are unfaithful because of their allegiance to their party. Number one is, I don't think your party should be your identity. I think your party should be a tool that you use to get good things done. And sometimes that tool might be used by other people to do not so good things. But if our party is not our identity, then you can't say somebody is in sin because they're in a certain party. The other thing is, neither of the parties are faithful applications of the gospel. I still don't understand why people I don't understand how people can look at either of these parties and try to put the stamp of Jesus on them. I mean, let's be honest, the Republican Party just took pro-life stuff out of their agenda. You really want to put Jesus' stamp on that? So my thing is, let's make sure that we are faithful within whatever tool that we are using and don't make it our identity. Now, the Democrats who responded to this, who were upset, were basically like, what do you mean sexualizing children? You just made that up. What are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about the places in the Democratic Party that support books coming into schools that are not age appropriate, with sexual content for first graders, third graders, whatever, that is not appropriate for their age. And most of y'all don't even know that's going on because they've disguised it behind talking about the silly ban on books that had to do something with race. That was silly. But most of the books that have been banned when you're talking about what was going on in Florida were because of their sexual content. Yes, I'm talking about transgender ideology and teaching it in schools. Yes, I'm talking about the pop culture that brings all type of sexualization to our community, and Democrats say nothing about it or promote it. That's what I'm talking about. And so I think if you are in the Democratic Party and you have nothing to say about the value of life, even if you don't think that Republicans are completely right on the abortion issue, cool. Okay, I don't think they're completely right on it either. For you to be in that party and have nothing to say about the Democratic Party's stance on it is wrong and unfaithful. All right? Now, most of the Republicans who responded, and I got a larger response from Christian Republicans, Christian conservatives, were to say, what do you mean that there's greed and racism in the Republican Party? There's greed and racism in both parties. I didn't say that there wasn't. People are telling me that this basically implies that there's no racism or no greed in the Democratic Party. That's not what's being implied. I took two things from each side that I think they get wrong, and I think the Republican Party gets race more wrong than the Democratic Party in many instances. I took two things from each party and said, if you're not speaking up about these things, then you are not being faithful. That doesn't mean that they don't occur at all in the other party. Believe me, I've spent most of my life in the Democratic Party. I'm well aware of the racism and the greed in the Democratic Party. But I chose to point that out in the Republican Party because it's a major issue there. And instead of taking the lesson and saying, man, am I speaking out against this? Why do I need to speak out against this in my party? We automatically get defensive, which is a violation of what I just said. What you're showing me by getting defensive instead of trying to find the lesson and being charitable is that your identity's in your party. You can say whatever you want to about the Democratic Party. I may agree, I may disagree, but you attacking the Democratic Party or you criticizing the Democratic Party is not going to make me feel any kind of way. It's not going to make me feel any kind of way because that's not my identity. I don't feel the need to defend the Democratic Party every time somebody criticizes it or attacks it. Sometimes it's needed. Sometimes it's wrong and overblown. But what I'm trying to get at for the Christians listening to this is your party should not control you and should not be part of your identity. You can be in whatever party you want to be in, but you cannot agree with the things that they do or say that are counter to the gospel. And too many Christians, especially in election season, don't want to hear anything negative. I can't tell you how many texts and emails and stuff I get because people cannot handle their party getting called out on their garbage, especially during election cycles. People expect me to sit here and just pander to them and their party because the election is so important. I know how important the election is. I spend a lot of time focused and talking about the election. It will never mean that I'm not going to tell the truth or critique either party. I don't care if the election's tomorrow. I don't care if you and your mama are listening to this and you're going to be influenced about it as you go out and vote tomorrow. That's up to you. I'm not here to be a party agent, right? And neither should Christians in general. We should be about taking the right position. And too many of us refuse to take the right position or speak out against the wrong position because our party is part of our identity. As always, man, it is a blessing to even have people who are listening and trying to hear out what this ministry is trying to accomplish. Thank you for listening, as always. And ANCAMP, there's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, ANCAMP, we'll holla at you.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up, but with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.